Give me a wee sec. It's going. It's gone. It's going.
Talk to me and I can hear your voice, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, just let me know if there's anything that that I can't see, but I need to know.
Okay.
I'm looking at my PowerPoint only, and my little picture on the right-hand side, and a few, only 5 or so faces. Okay, so the paranormal exists, but so what? I'm going to look at these 2 aspects. And I'm going to start by saying that my assertion that the paranormal exists doesn't depend upon some tricky use of words or semantics. There is, if you look up the dictionary, such a word, such a concept, and it's been written about for a very long time. But my assertion also doesn't depend upon the media, a quagmire of spooky stories or alien narratives, and unfortunately almost always offering quite unsupported conjecture or posing unanswered questions and never really returning to those questions subsequently. My argument is founded primarily upon my own corroborated and transformative experiences of close-up, awesome paranormal phenomena. And secondly, it's supported by striking personal accounts of other people whom I trust. And it's all set in the context of impressive global research findings. Now, let me tidy something up. It might surprise you to know right from the start that I am willing to accept that the paranormal doesn't exist. Indeed, I have said this in recent years, but only if the listener agrees that such phenomena can be accepted as normal. And it was the late Enrico Marabini, and I've just, yeah, there's there. He was a leading psychical researcher from the north of Italy. And when we met, he said something to me. He said, I don't like your logo for the SSPR, investigating the paranormal, because there's no such thing. He said it's all normal to the people for whom it happens. But even acknowledging the truth of that, I would still like to use the term paranormal simply to refer to purported events or phenomena that are inexplicable to current science. And that category of phenomena should illumine our human experience. In other words, I'm acknowledging that there will be some things that are inexplicable, but if you knew that they existed somewhere in the universe, it wouldn't really affect the way you live your life. So where do I start? My own strange psychic experiences, if you like, began as a young child, raised in a Christian house. My father was the pastor of South Ballyhullish, which some of you will know is near Glencoe. And I was brought up from the earliest age to have a powerful belief in God and the devil. Psychic impressions that I had as an 8-year-old, such as sensing energies moving around the church or seeing certain stones pulsing with energy. These were seen by me and by others as some sort of spiritual gift. Perhaps if they were strong and they contained information with them, they would be seen literally as visitations by the Holy Spirit. But I had a problem with this interpretation of what was happening that I couldn't really tell anyone about, because the Holy Spirit sounded like my grandmother. And she spoke of the shared memories that we had before she passed. And I really couldn't tell anyone, because to show a strong interest in developing these gifts was seen as not what God wants. If God wants you to have these gifts, he'll give them to you. So any other interest would be the work of the devil. But I did read my Bible, and I found support in the New Testament from Paul, who wrote in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, "My dear friends, do not believe all who claim to have the Spirit, but test them to find out if the Spirit they have comes from God." And elsewhere in 1 Corinthians 12:10, he says, "He," that's God, "gives one person the power to perform miracles and another the ability to prophesy. He gives someone else the ability to discern whether a message is from the Spirit of God or from another spirit." But here was my dilemma. I was a young child. Even in secondary school, I found it difficult to test spirit. It was only when I went to university that I learned how to conduct research. And I realized that developing spiritual gifts, or the gift of discernment, developing my intuition and trying to make sense of these aspects of human experience, it didn't mean I had to kiss my brains goodbye. Approaching paranormal phenomena as an open-minded but skeptical investigator who is also an experiencer, it's a difficult balance to maintain. I have one foot in the dominant scientific need for repeatable, quantitative, objective, hard evidence. And my other foot is in a banana skin of qualitative analysis and individual subjectivities for the many paranormal claims and conspiracy theories and extraterrestrial beliefs that are out there. But my equilibrium returns a little when these worlds overlap, and occasionally I find strong evidence to support extraordinary claims. Two portrait photographs on the wall of my study sum up the dichotomy. On the left, the late Professor of Astronomy, Archie Roy, founder of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, the SSPR, and the late Albert Best, a famous medium, healer, who became a close friend of mine, both of whom shared a mutual respect, and they demonstrated how to work together to respond effectively to the many cases that came to the SSPR. I want to unpack the context of paranormality before we focus on my own key influences and personal encounters. The paranormal includes well over 100 topics or categories, including extrasensory perception, telepathy, ghosts, the afterlife, UFOs. There's more on the screen in front of you. Now, surveys show that 3 to 4 billion people worldwide have reported a belief that the paranormal exists. And it said that 2/3 of Americans report that they have had a mystical experience. Around 8 billion people on this planet believe in religion, which, as I think most people would agree, is institutionalized paranormality, with its beliefs in miracles and an afterlife, and even permanent paranormal objects in their relics. Now, some people might be impressed by these numbers. They might think that these indicate that there's something worthwhile to believe in, and I would accept that they may be correct. Others, however, watch what a zillion flies eat to thrive upon, and they're less convinced. Anyway, just because you accept one aspect of paranormality doesn't validate the wide range of all the other aspects. So my question is, how do you filter out misinterpretation or misunderstanding to identify what is worthy of study? The filtering of claims for the paranormal must involve evidence-based reasoning, even if you accept that the physical sciences do struggle to engage with non-physical phenomena. But we can't leave something as important as shaping our view of reality to some material reductionist physical bias. Such an attitude means that any supporting evidence for the paranormal, 100% of it, can only be due to flukes, frauds, or fraud. But nor should we rely on pseudoscience of magical thinking, because believers, even if they do get results, will quickly be dismissed as operating out of ignorance or some other deficit-related put-down term, distorted, unfortunately, by misplaced efforts, overwhelmed by anecdotes of thousands of well-intentioned but essentially incompetent amateur investigators, or the worst category, self-proclaimed psychics. Paranormality merits the top-ranking researches to be carried out perhaps in multidisciplinary teams to examine if paranormal experiences are not simply self-produced, as Professor Wiseman argued in 2011, to make sure that they're not simply psychological anomalies explainable by neuroscience, as Professor Chris French would assert, and to check that they're not experiences, some of them anyway, that are merely induced by infrasound, as Parsons and Cooper suggested in 2015. Sometimes I am asked why paranormal phenomena are seldom studied in laboratory experiments, or at least within highly controlled conditions. And the most obvious answer is funding is scarce. Academics and their researchers follow the money, increasingly these days. But when we look at the study of mediumship, I have found that in general, successful mediumship is based on the strength of the need of the client or the sitter, and that communication is heightened by positive relationships between the sitter, their deceased, and the medium. I would go so far as to say that the best mediumship is based on a strong emotional bond, rather than simply a need to keep to a researcher's appointment schedule. I mean, if you want to develop a close or even loving relationship with someone, how would you go about it? I suggest that you would be more than respectful. You would be patient, you would encourage them, you would nurture them, you would indeed trust them, respecting boundaries, but inviting a closer engagement. Compare that with the formality of a skeptical, even hostile researcher who implicitly and sometimes explicitly doesn't trust anything, who checks everyone and everything for signs of cheating, always constantly looking for alternative explanations, sometimes using intrusive questioning, and I have known even intimate searches to be carried out within the context of the pressures of demands to produce on time for what is an artificial agenda. No wonder that productive working relationships between researchers and mediums have proved to be so difficult over such a long time. I hope it will be eased now. I think there's a new understanding from university researchers, and I'm thinking of Professor Chris Rowe, president of the London SPR, who's working with some of his colleagues in a much more supportive and interactive integrated approach to mediumship. Now, it was after a decade of frustration in me trying to replicate paranormal phenomena, physical phenomena, in all sorts of various groups, secular and spiritualist, that eventually I was told by mediumistic friends that maybe I needed to replace my skepticism, my minimalist evaluations, with a sense of wonder, with excitement, with positive emotions, even a loving group bond between sitters, because it would create better conditions for phenomena. And here's the point I wish to make about that perspective. It produced results almost immediately. It worked. And that's why I wonder if immersive field research, where researchers work with mediums for a much longer period of time, at a much deeper level, perhaps even suspending belief and judgment to see if the results are there to be studied at the end of the process. That might be more productive than previous efforts. But here I have to say something a little bit provocative, I think. I think mediums could do a lot to protect themselves against obvious criticisms. All they would have to do is wear a blindfold and speak indirectly with the sitter through a third party. That would eliminate visual and voice clues. And while such steps would not prevent spirit communication, it would certainly put a stop to cold reading allegations. When I raised this with a spiritualist medium who was giving a talk in Glasgow, she blinked and said she had never heard of such a thing and had never considered it. She obviously doesn't listen to most people who seek to dismiss mediumship for those very reasons. And here is something I've come to after many years of thinking about dark seances, where people sit in blackout conditions. I think that either they need to come out of the dark, literally, or at least allow heat thermal imaging cameras to record the seances. If that had happened, recent fakes would have been caught earlier. There is a mildly provocative side to me. And when I hear about parapsychology, I feel like shouting out, "Oi, show us your numbers," because I know how heavily they are into quantitative analysis. I don't do that anymore because Professor Dean Radin's book, Real Magic, that came out in 2018, provided an overview of thousands of scientific studies of paranormality, or PSI, Psi, he calls it. He asserts that his meta-analyses show very high levels of significance of over 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds that the following phenomena did not happen by chance. Telepathy, largely studied through Gansfeld studies. Perception that seems to transcend both space and time, as seen in clairvoyance perhaps, or remote viewing. Presentiment, where your body reacts, and this can be measured before events take place. And in computerized images, sometimes the presentiment happens before the computer has chosen which images to display. Precognition, knowing the future. Influencing physical systems of all kinds of electrical equipment, but often computers, and certainly random number generators, as I'll be speaking about shortly. And the biggest project of all, the Global Consciousness Project, was able to show that random number generators were being influenced worldwide, a result which is above 1 trillion to 1 greater than chance. And these are not allegations. These are analysis of studies that anyone can go and look at the raw data. If it's numbers that persuade you, buy the book, look up the studies. I think that there are issues about meta-analysis. Radin himself concludes there is no need for further proof-oriented scientific evidence, and debates will persist over ways to best explain and interpret these data. But the existential question that some forms of PSI or psi paranormality exist is for all practical purposes settled. Is he a lone voice? Even though he's a highly regarded professor. Well, the Professor Jessica Utz, actually president of the American Statisticians Society, she leads statistic analysis in the USA. She gave a speech back in 2016, arguing that the data in support of precognition and possibly some other paranormal phenomena, but definitely precognition, are quite strong statistically and would be widely accepted if it pertained to something more mundane. And she went on to add, when I have given talks on this topic to audiences of statisticians, I show lots of data. And then I ask the audience, which would be more convincing to you? Lots more data or one strong personal experience? And almost without fail, she says, the response is one strong personal experience. So I will take that observation, and on that basis, I can say to you that I have been fortunate enough to have friends who have demonstrated paranormal abilities to me frequently. And I'm thinking of mediums who give consistently accurate and impressive clairvoyance, such as the Scottish medium who is registered blind, Dominic Bogue. I gave Dominic 2 sealed envelopes. I was the only person who put the items inside the envelopes and sealed them and sellotaped them and kept them constantly with me, never out of my grasp. And I handed them to him. One envelope contained a letter and the other contained a photograph. And I asked him to tell me, using his mediumistic skills, what was in these envelopes. He wasn't allowed to open or examine the envelopes. And of course, he was blind, but he couldn't even feel what was in them. And he made 75 statements. 56 of the statements were accurate, as judged by the person who wrote the letter and provided the photograph. Dominic didn't even know that they belonged to the same person, although he was able to tell me. He went further. He told me who the letter was about and named the person. And he also told me why the letter writer wrote the letter. What was the main concern? And he went on to say things that the letter and photograph provider denied, only to later reveal that Dominic was in fact correct. She was simply embarrassed that he was so correct. I think this is astonishing. I've tried doing it with people who don't think they have any psychic ability, and they're very lucky if they can get even half a dozen statements right, by chance, by guessing. And I have given Dominic's name to at least one group of university psychical researchers, or as they prefer to call themselves, parapsychologists. And 2 years later, Dominic has never had an approach. What is that about? Let me go further, just a little back in time. Albert Best asked me, would I like to see physical, spiritual healing? And I said, yes. So when I turned up, he was sitting with his eyes closed. And there was a young man in front of him who had a brain tumor. And his mother was standing observing what was happening. Albert stood up and was still with his eyes closed, began to speak in fluent German. And Albert had told me that his spirit helper had been a German doctor in his own earthly life. When the mother took her son to a consultant who had previously provided x-rays of the tumor, the consultant apologized to the mother and said, we must have got the x-rays mixed up with another patient. Your son doesn't have a tumor. And as far as we can tell, based on today's test, never did. The tumor had gone. And yet when I tell that to people, I can sense how difficult it is to believe that I saw a globular mass come out of the top of the child's head and was being held in Albert's fingers as he pushed it away in a bowl of water. Now, I have friends who investigate the paranormal, and they have also had thought-provoking cases. Michele Di Nicastro, a good friend, an Italian parapsychologist, when I asked him what was his most influential evidence after investigating hundreds of cases, sometimes with university colleagues, he said that the ones that provided extraordinary evidential value was the Azurina case of a ghost girl's voice taken in secure surroundings of a castle that had been locked down with an inner circle of researchers and microphones left in corridors. And the little girl was heard on several occasions. Calling for her mama. Here's the thing. And by the way, there are half a dozen recordings. I just chose one that was very short and snappy, easy to understand. When this ghost girl's voice recording was sent to 2 different universities and they were given no information about the paranormal context, they both independently and separately came back to say, wow, you have got a recording of what sounds like a little girl's voice, but it's not, because it doesn't have a human larynx. In fact, we think it might have been produced in a computer laboratory, an audio laboratory, deliberately constructed to perhaps challenge us or confuse us. The little girl in one of her recordings provided the circumstances of her death. And I'm not going to play it to a worldwide audience. Let me just tell you, it's a little unnerving to hear a lynch mob chase and capture and execute the little girl because she was an albino child and regarded as the devil's child. Michele also researched with a team of investigators Bardi Castle in Italy. And to cut a fascinating story, very short, he caught an image in infrared, which is grainy, but it was in pitch darkness. But I reckon that that's possibly the best ghost photograph in the world. And some of you will be wondering if my judgment's gone off to claim that that very grainy photograph could be the best. But look at the one to the right, because simultaneously running beside that infrared camera, there's a heat thermal imaging camera, getting a heat thermal image of the infrared image. In other words, that ghost was not a visual anomaly. That ghost was emitting heat.
Hi, your image is over the top of that picture on my screen, Nick. Is that in the case for everybody?
I don't think I can. Does that help? Arlo?
Not for me. It's still there. I don't know. Is there a way to move the image of you but still see your screen?
I don't know. And this, what does it look like to you? No, can't hear on this. I'm gonna carry on.
Yeah, I can see everything. Yeah.
Okay. The heat thermal images shows that there was something physically in that space, and you can see a close correspondence between the two images. In fact, the heat thermal images, if you're used to reading them, and I'm not, but I have this in good authority, the brighter colours indicate more heat. In other words, it's the wound on the upper left arm is consistent with what a wound would look like if viewed through a heat thermal imaging camera. Now, Michele continues to conduct experiments, and for 15 years he has shown repeatedly that people can influence the physical environment around them. He particularly focuses on random number generators, and he says that this interference with the operation of the machine is done telepathically, sometimes at key moments of seance phenomena. Michele and his partner Federica visited Scotland and stayed with my wife Sarah and I. And we took them to Edinburgh, and we took them to Greyfriars Kirkyard. And as we approached the Covenanters prison, his partner Federica strongly felt the presence of a young lady, a young girl spirit, very close to us. And then Federica jumped. She was standing right beside me. And she reacted and said she had been scratched inexplicably on one side of her neck. And there were 3 scratch marks, wheels coming up as we looked. Now, it was quite cold that day, and Federica wore a leather jacket over a blouse, and she never took off that jacket throughout the entire day. However, when we got home and Federica took off her jacket, a small muddy hand mark, a muddy mark left by a small hand, appeared on her blouse. Okay, Steve Mira, a paranormal investigator from Manchester. He has a fascinating international list of cases he studied. I went with him to America's most demonic haunting of a house in Seattle in America just a few years ago. When I asked him what he'd been doing recently, he said, well, I've been looking late last year at an electron diffusion region, which is what the scientists have called a portal at Skinwalker Ranch. And when I asked him, where would he go to seek paranormal phenomena? He said, probably I would go back to Skinwalker Ranch. He said, but I don't need to go that far. I would go to Ireland, and I would go to a place which is an ancient Irish monument. I think it may have been a burial mound. And within an ancient granite wall in Ireland, he could hear a female voice speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Ancient Gaelic, perhaps. He also said that a mug had dematerialized and then rematerialized. So he took the mug and an identical mug from the same set in that kitchen, and he took them and had them examined at Lancaster University. The mug that had apported showed a diathermic or heat reaction in the very clay of the mug, the ceramic of the mug, and not for the other mug that was taken as a control. Steve, I know, wants to get to the truth of things and will only report the truth that he finds. So he's willing to call out hoaxes, even when it's not in his financial interest to do so, such as when he went to Peru and investigated alleged alien mummies, only to find after a great deal of work and effort and indeed some danger that they were hoaxes as determined by a university in Sri Lanka. And Malcolm Robinson, who may be in this audience today, a paranormal investigator from Hastings, although he's most well known for his UFO work, he said that he was mystified when a chest of drawers levitated once in front of him, very clearly. And in terms of his enormous history of cases, read some of his books to find out more. He's about to produce a book on the Socky poltergeist, Socky being a small town or large village in Scotland. And of course, what's become a long-term popular case, the Bob Taylor UFO assault case that took place in Dethmont Woods near Falkirk. What would my answer to my own question be? What have been my most influential paranormal experiences? They really began during two sittings in the late 1990s of the Skoll experiment, in which my wife Sarah and I witnessed a very wide range of inexplicable light phenomena. My wife Sarah levitated in a chair. She had a conversation with a man who'd materialized in front of her and who offered her a handshake to reassure her. And when she asked if she could feel up his arm, there was no shoulder, there was no body attached to this arm, and the hand was still shaking hers. On another occasion, light phenomena was trapped in my hands, and I was able to turn them in such a way that there were no wires or nylon fishing line or anything else, making them whiz around the room accurately. One of those lights shot inside my wife's rib cage, and she squealed as she said she felt a tickling sensation from inside her ribs before it popped out and flew around the room. If later on in question time you want to know more about this, I'd be very willing to talk about it, but we were so affected by what we witnessed. I would use the word, my life was transformed during only 2 school sittings, and they had over 30 for invited guests, including scientists from Europe. They even changed location to Spain and America to show that it wasn't a function of the cellar in the village of Skoll. I've tried for a decade to replicate that phenomenon, using all sorts of self-proclaimed physical mediums and various groups in and out of spiritualist churches and home circles, and using different methods over 10 years with very little success. But there was an unexpected benefit. I learned how to meditate. And I discovered that through meditation, some mediumistic sensitivity, some intuitive feelings began to develop slowly. Now, those of you who know me will have heard me talk about the Skoll experiments, and I don't want to go on about them. But those who haven't heard of them are recommended to find them online. There's a Skoll report, 300-page scientific report, written by the authors. Unfortunately, 3 of the co-authors are deceased. And you can't go and do your own investigations because the experiment stopped at the end of the 90s because they were told that they were becoming dangerous. And even although a book has been produced and there's a video available for free, a DVD called The Afterlife Investigations with some good footage in them, the SPR who sent those 3 investigators were highly critical that they produced claims of phenomena that had been produced in the dark. Now, my update, for those of you who know that story, you may not know that 2 Scottish mediums from my home circle went out to Spain and fully materialized the spirit communicator team. I think it was 6 spirit people in total, physically in the room, to be spoken with and to be hugged and touched and kissed and the Foys were overcome with emotion to be able to meet spirit communicators they had come to regard as family before the experiments abruptly ended. There's a list of at least 20 top scientists from all over Europe who came and saw things they couldn't explain, because the school experiments never had a blank sitting. Even a group of people came from Nassau, and they saw phenomena they couldn't explain either at the time, though they refused to acknowledge they even attended subsequently. What some of you will not know is that in recent years, I have attended blacked out seances in the Glasgow area where spirit people materialized. And I've had extended conversations over 2 hours on several occasions with people from the spirit world. They shook hands with me. A child leapt into my lap and gave me a hug. The hand that was shaking mine had no body attached. Furniture levitated and spun. Objects disappeared into the wall beside my head, and they didn't always come back. But what might interest you more is that more recently I've been in well-lit Glasgow restaurants, having dinner with the same medium friends, and on approximately 5 occasions that I can recall from memory, tables have slid around inexplicably. A pet dog partially materialized under the table on one occasion, and I was hit by its tail. And most recently in a Glasgow tea room, 2 tables levitated. One was a large bench type table that was easily 18 inches or 2 feet off the ground. And I tried to push it down, and it was as if I was the feather. I made no effect. And then I noticed another round coffee type table, also levitating, belonged to a customer that had nothing to do with us. But observing paranormal events, even when they're witnessed and corroborated, even when they're recorded, like the pictures in front of you, it's not as influential as when it happens through you. And just in case I'm deluded, I always speak of situations where witnesses are available to confirm what just happened. Indeed, one of the witnesses is part of the audience tonight, I think. This account that I'm going to give you of mediumistic ability in me has 2 witnesses. My wife Sarah was at home alone, sitting in the lounge one evening when a woman materialized beside her. Sarah was surprised, but not afraid. And she said to the woman, "Who are you?" "Elizabeth," was the reply. "Why are you here?" Sarah asked. And she said, "For Margaret." And then the spirit woman faded. Now, Sarah was concerned about that information, because when she gets messages like this infrequently, it has been in the past a portent of death. But for whom? My mother Margaret, Sarah's aunt Margaret. We phoned them and they were fine. And several days passed and we thought, somehow, for the first time ever, Spirit have got it wrong. But within a fortnight, Sarah's lifelong friend, Sheila, phoned to pass on the sad news that her sister Mags had unexpectedly been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she had only a few days to live. We went to the funeral. Sarah told Sheila later about the experience she had had, and Sheila confirmed that her mother's name was Elizabeth, that her description matched. Sheila was very keen to know if Mags or their mother could communicate further, so she came up from the south of England to visit us in our home. I sat with Sheila and with Sarah quietly. Using meditative techniques, I expanded my awareness And then I became aware of a presence building up invisibly just a few feet away. And I sent a thought, Mags, is that you? And an answer came back, yes, but only I could hear it. I sent another thought to Mags, do you know that Sheila is here? Yes, that's why I'm here, she replied again, silently. I turned to Sheila and said to her, I think I might have Mags here. What would you like to know? And Sheila said, is she happy? Where is she? Is she in heaven? And I turned to the space in which the presence was still there, but stronger now, and said, Mags, did you hear that question? Yes, she said. So what do you have to say? I asked. Her words were clearer now. I didn't know if Sarah or Sheila could hear them. As it turns out, they couldn't. And Mags responded, tell her I'm happy. When I passed, I was welcomed by a group of family and friends, and it was lovely to meet them with hugs and kisses and smiles. I'm in a place like heaven, but it's not perfect. It's not what I imagined it to be. But hey, give me time. And when I relayed these words to Sheila, she smiled. That's so like her, she said. And she explained that Mags had worked as a troubleshooter for her company, being sent to branches to turn them around quickly for the better. She still had a make it better attitude, even in the spirit world. But Sheila surprised me with what she said next. She said, Nick, how do you know it's really Mags? And I turned to the empty space. And I said, Mags, did you hear that? Yes, came a reply. And then she spoke to me as if I was a slow learner, which I think I am. She spoke clearly to me and said, tell her that when I passed over, I was met by a group, a committee, if you like, of family and friends, and I made them laugh. I was wearing bright red high heels, and I asked them if it was all right to wear heels here. And a guy stepped forward and said, well, you can if you want, love, but no one's going to hear you coming. And everyone laughed. But I was taken aback. I wasn't laughing. I had asked for proof, and Mags had basically retold the same story. So I turned to Sheila with an apologetic air and said, I'm sorry, Sheila. Mags hasn't given me any additional answers, any proof. She just repeated the same story of meeting people when she arrived on the other side. And Sheila asked me simply to say what I had been told. And I began, she said that when she passed over, she was met by a group, a sort of committee of family and friends, and she made them laugh by saying, I'm wearing bright red high heels. Is it okay to wear these here? And then I realized that Sheila was in tears. She said, thank you. That was the proof I needed. And she could probably see from my face that I didn't understand. And she continued, I gave red high heels to replace a pair of flatties on Mag's feet. I gave them to the undertaker with clothes I'd picked out for Mags to wear in her coffin, just before he closed the coffin lid. And I made him promise not to tell anyone. Only one relative was present. Only we knew that that had happened. And Mags, of course. I learned something that day. Just pass on what spirit tell you. Don't try to interpret or evaluate or paraphrase. Don't prejudge. I so nearly ignored the proof that I had been asked for. It had been given to me because I was looking for something that seemed acceptable proof to me. But I was acting in ignorance of the facts. And Mags went on to give additional evidence that she knew what else Sheila had done to ensure that she looked best in her coffin, speaking with humour and cheerfulness and the characteristic love that she was known to have. But my sense of Mags's presence began to fade, and I returned to what I would call a normal state of alert wakefulness. Now, Mags has communicated since then. She shows that she continues to be aware of what's happening in Sheila's life and Sheila's actions and decisions about things. But not often enough, I'm sure, for Sheila. I have no desire to be known as a medium or a psychic. But it's important to be honest. If you're going to work with people, you have to work with integrity. You have to report strange experiences, and if spirit communications does happen, it should be shared, whether it suits me or not. Similarly, if you have disappointments about spirit communication, if you can see problems, as I have done, you need to report that as well, whether it suits or not. My concerns go beyond any stigmatizing effects of being labeled a medium or a psychic. I would acknowledge that when all's said and done in this field, there's a lot more said than done. I have found few mediums that are as talented as they want people to think they are. But it's not always about money. I know a lot of poor and working mediums. It's often about vanity. Albert Best used to say, when ego walks in, spirit walk out, and he kept confidentiality. He was consulted in his Glasgow flat by international stars from both sides of the Atlantic, heads of state, heads of government. I know because I have his telephone list. He said to me once, when speaking of a high-ranking famous person, someone's distress matters more to me than their status, and they deserve privacy. So what are we to make of all this? The implications of significant research findings, or high strangeness in case investigations? What do we make of the successes of the talented mediums that do exist, the transformative personal experiences of investigators and friends and me? This point is important. In education, if inspectors visit schools, they've been known to respond to wonderful, inspirational stories of what teachers intend to do, their plans, their early steps at implementing them. And the inspector's response can be summed up as, so what? Inspectors want evidence of learning that they can measure. They even want pupils' thinking to be made visible. And this is similar to the position I find myself in now, after more than 30 years of study of troublesome knowledge. No longer troublesome kids. After 20 odd years of case investigations, mainly for the SSPR, and my own paranormal experiences, I've only given you one, I say to myself, so what? What does it all mean for the way that I understand reality? What are the implications for how I should live my life? I've been transformed, but into what? And what evidence should I select from this enormous community of paranormality to shape and guide my conclusions as to how to live the time I have left? In one of my first English studies lectures, the tutor, Martin Davies, acknowledged that his audience already had a fluency, even a skill in using their first language, English. But he said in that very first lecture, we need now to learn a language for talking about language, linguistics. So this is what I say to you. We collectively need to find a language that enables us to make greater progress than we've made in the past century or so. I have a physics professor friend who says, point to any area of mainstream science, choose a time period like 50 years, and you can show demonstrable learning and progress available for anyone to check it out. Take over a century of psychical research, and I think the picture you're left with is confusion. We might benefit from moving away from what I was brought up in by my pastor father, where the world is seen as either God or the devil, where there's a duality, a binary thinking, rather than the flexibility of a new spirituality. And I think we have to move to the new sciences to extend our current understanding of life, which I think most of us take for granted. You know, if we knew that there were other dimensions of reality, it would explain a lot to paranormal phenomena, including materializations and dematerializations, including UFO travel conundrums. Even Einstein recognized spooky action at a distance. And scientists who seek to talk about string theory and quantum effects know that they're in such an early stage of their own field. It will take time, especially to bleed through or backwash into the common parlance, the common people. And I'm one of those because I don't know much about quantum effects. But I know that lots of people are claiming the word quantum for their healing modalities or their machinery, and it's always about money. I think even consciousness studies. You think you know how your mind works? Tell me how your subconscious works. It's not available to your conscious mind normally, though it is through hypnosis and perhaps meditation. And then there's the superconscious, a more controversial term. I would suggest to you, if you're honest, you have a limited awareness of your internal world, never mind the universal cosmos, and that very little of what's inside you is observable either. But whatever is inside you, it should inform the way you think and reflect on yourself. We're beginning to hear from scientists small numbers of studies that show that emotions affect our world, not just our perceptions, not only our bodies, but emotions have been shown in different situations to alter physical reality. And I'm happy to take questions about that, for I have evidence in my own life. However, while we're in lockdown, while science is in transition, I'll pin my conclusion to the end of this talk. I raised this with a group of Canadian psychical researchers and paranormal investigators some years ago. I said, what would you express to your children on your deathbed that you were sure was true? Found as a result of your own efforts, not through books or television. And they began a discussion which was still being talked about 6 years later. One man came up with his own theory. Love is all there is. It underpins everything. It's the most powerful thing to dedicate your life's efforts to understanding, to sharing, to giving, receiving. And I thought that was a good answer. Mine's is a little more limited, a little more cautious. I conclude, after a lifetime of looking into the paranormal, that there is more to life than what we can measure. And that more includes intelligent beings who are able to communicate with us. And some of these beings are recognizable as deceased persons. And I still say, so what? What's the impact of accepting my conclusion? If you can accept my conclusion, it will change your reality. It could open a door of infinite possibilities for you. You will realize something that I have realized. You don't see the world the way it is. You see the world the way you are. And if you can widen your conscious awareness, if you can expand your appreciation of what it means to be a human being, you will realize, as I believe, there is no in and out, here and there, them and us. We're all connected, interconnected, not just with each other, but with all of life. Even as I knew as an 8-year-old in South Ballahullish, the very stones would shine with energy and pulse. And if you get to that point, perhaps you will end up agreeing with Enrico Marabini that what currently seems strange to you could well become the new normal. I hear people talking about a new normal after lockdown, but I think they're on another level. Thank you very much.
Right, Nick, that was fantastic. What we'll do is I'll shut up and I'll let you pick questions from our group. So it's like the Muppet Show. So if anyone wants to get Nick's attention, just raise your hand. So yep. Nick, I'll let you I'll let you unmute people, okay?
Yeah, can you, Ines, can you have it one person speaks at a time? Otherwise we could get maybe 50, 60 people trying to chip in.
Okay, well I'm going to, well Brian, apparently you're unmuted already.
Yeah, so Brian, great to see you. I'm looking forward to your question because I know how you think about some of these topics.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. What I'll say is this is, if there was a paranormal Oscar, you've just won it. Okay? So take your award on that. So what I would like to say is this, Nick, that perhaps of all the people here apart from yourself, I'm in a unique position here, because some of the stuff you were talking about what went on in Peru, what went on in Seattle, I was peripherally and directly involved in that. So I've got insight into what actually happened there.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you mentioned the quantum aspects of this, and you've actually said what I think is fundamental to all of this, and it's quantum entanglement. Okay, a phenomenon that they know exists, it is real, and it drives physicists up the wall because they can't explain it. This is Einstein's spooky attraction, spooky action at distance, same thing. That if there is an answer, it lies in the quantum world, and that is without a shadow of a doubt. And I don't think I can actually ask you a question because I'm not being funny. You've covered it all, mate. What went on at school? I mean, I've spoken to Robin Foy. I mean, I've been there. The Sochi poltergeist. I live 5 miles from Sochi. I've reinvestigated the case. Something did happen there. I've spoken to the doctor that actually treated Virginia Campbell, Dr. Logan. I've got his testimony that I've actually, he saw that actually happening there. That I know that when I pass, that there's another reality out there for me, and I'll get to it. But the only thing that holds me back from this, and I'm throwing this out to everybody that's actually listening, is that one of the questions that was asked of this an entity called Becky. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but you know what I'm talking about. One of the questions was, what is life like on the other side? And the answer that came back in a way chilled me. It said, it's very like here for those that make it. And that was, and it was left hanging at that. So we never did find exactly what that meant. But what I will say is, Nick, that although I can't ask you a question because I don't have any, because you've answered them all yourself, but all I can say is thank you very much. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation and a pleasure to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you give me a little wave or even just shout your name, because I might not have everyone on screen. Arlo, I can see you're raising your finger like Alien Bill pointing to the sky. Yeah, I'll unmute you. You should be unmuted now. Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear us, Nick?
Yep.
Right. thank you for that talk. That was amazing. And I know me and you have spoken quite a lot over the last couple of weeks, and I've heard a lot of the things you've talked about tonight recently, and some of it is mind-blowing. I loved the positive end to the talk that you've given there. I know, I mean, so what question is almost sort of, you know, okay, so there's paranormal activity, so what? But yeah, there's a lot of so what, you know, it is an important thing. And while you were talking, I'd written down a few questions. Some of them now, after having heard such a positive end, seem a little bit churlish. I mean, one that I would, can I ask a couple of questions? I mean, do you want to take one and one later? Or one would be to do with, you know, Randy the Great. He's offered $1 million for anyone who can prove paranormal activity. Now, you mentioned the lack of funding, the scarcity and the sparse sort of funding that's available. For example, for Professor Radin's research.
Radin, yeah.
Okay, and the research that yourself has done and has documented at school. You were part of a team which were very much careful in their approach to that, and I would hope to gather evidence that struck raw, so to speak. Right? Why is, with £1 million on offer, why is there not £500,000 on offer to research this? Do you know, somebody by researching it, or even $100,000, you know, if that money was made available 10 times, then surely one in those 10 could get that evidence that is required to win the $1 million on offer.
Okay.
And to prove the paranormal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reluctant to criticise James Randi and other sceptical operators for the way in which they organise their competitions and arrange their enormous prizes. I'll tell you what I've heard.
There's a lot of noise there.
Yeah.
Not me.
I'll tell you what I've heard, and you can reflect upon it and look in to see if it's correct. As I say, I don't know enough about it. I know some people that have tried to contact Randy and found it difficult and said, I will demonstrate paranormal activity, and he's never followed it up and got back to them. I've read about people that have demonstrated phenomena and he's found an unexpected wriggle room, if you like, so that he doesn't have to pay out. And I looked this up on Wikipedia, which of course has to be always double checked. And what they said is that some of these people are instituting a two-step process. In other words, they have one set of tests, and then you qualify for another set of tests. In other words, it's not straightforward. They don't want to pay out. But Gary Schwartz in America wrote to say that he has tried to get Randy to attend demonstrations of paranormality, and he doesn't want to do it. And in fact, Randy's prize was withdrawn some years ago.
Oh, really?
But it's still, there are other prizes of a similar kind of nature, big money prizes. But Randy himself, he's withdrawn. And of course, his critics would say, well, it's because he realizes that there's more and more evidence building up.
Right.
But
because he's going to have to pay out.
I don't like to judge situations where I don't know a lot about them, but that's what I can say.
Okay.
Did you have a second question, Alan?
That answers that question for me, and I do understand that this guy's put $1 million up, and he will do what he can to get out of paying it. And that's, you know, it's not on. There needs to be set criteria when he sets that offer out, and it needs to be accessible to those who can do it. Anyway, the second question, and this ties in very much with what Brian has just said. I mean, I come from a physics background. I work in medical physics originally. I now work in ultrasonography. I'm a cardiology physiologist. So I understand physics, and I have a passion about physics, cosmology, etc. Now, my feeling about quantum entanglement and subjects around that, there is a great divide between quantum physics and Einsteinian, is that the word? Einstein's physics, right? The two contradict each other, okay? And the holy grail of physics is still the unified theory that ties the two together. And that is something that people you know, very well funded researchers across physics still cannot do, and they're trying to do it. Right? Now, to me, the main thing that they're missing from quantum physics, I don't really fully believe in quantum physics. I think it describes what happens quite well and makes us make accurate predictions. I much more go for Einstein's theories. I think that the thing that is missing from quantum physics is what is it that transfers gravity? Now, we found a particle that transfers every other form of energy, okay, but not gravity. Gravitons, as they are being sort of provisionally known as, have not yet been discovered. Now, I don't think they will be discovered. And I think this is where the missing link between Einsteinian theories and quantum theories is going to come on over the next 20 years or so, hopefully. And I think that when that happens, we will discover that our brains are developed to live on this 3/4D Earth. So you've got space, the 3 spatial dimensions, and time. And they're actually 4 dimensions tied together in a thing called space-time. That's what Einstein tells us. Now, mainstream physics now says that we no longer can we say we live in a 4D space-time world. There are obviously many more dimensions, and there have to be for a lot of the current equations to work. And those equations do work, and those haven't got the
What's your question?
Okay.
What's your question?
The question around it is, as 3D through 4D people, our brains are not yet capable of handling the fact that there are further dimensions. And a lot of the things that we can explain from our 3/4D mindset could probably be explained from a higher dimension mindset very well. There's a book, which while you've been talking, I pulled it out. It's a book called Flatland. Very thin book. It's by a guy called Edwin A. Abbott, and I would highly recommend it to anybody. And what it does is it looks at things from a 2D perspective and how the 2D flatlanders can't understand 3D thinking like us. And it really hits home how we cannot understand things from a higher perspective. So these paranormal activities, they're like fingers going into a 2D world, a plane of paper, and the 2Ders can't see it coming from above, but when it hits their 2D plane, they're going, what the hell is that? What is these things popping up in our 2D world? Likewise, from a higher perspective, we would see things coming from a higher dimension into our world, and we would go, what the hell is that? Paranormal experience.
I'm not sure that I understood the question, but what I can say to you is that near the end of my talk, I said other dimensions of reality would explain a lot of paranormal phenomena. And so I agree with you, Arlo. I know that Barry, my friend Barry, the physics professor, was with us. I can't see him on my screen at the moment. Barry, you there? No. Barry, after his tenure of being an emeritus professor or international standing in physics, one of the first things he did was he wrote a book called The Heretic's Guide to Science. And he said all the things that he wasn't able to say without losing his tenure as a professor. And he basically said, and you know, this is a 200-page book, me shortening it into a sentence, but he basically said, all the stuff you're taught in science is somebody's belief. It's got a lot of evidence to back it up in some cases, and in other cases, theoretical physics is just a belief without the evidence. But they'll not take the same leniency with you if you come up with a belief without the evidence. So any other questions? Show me your hand or shout your name if you're not on screen. Some people are in mute, so even if I can't see your hand, I'm not going to hear you.
Anyone got a question? Anyone else got a
Peter?
question?
Yeah, I'll unmute you, Peter. You can unmute yourself, maybe, but yeah.
Unmuted myself.
Yep.
This, by the way, can I say, Innes, we should carry on doing this. This is a great experience to be able to do this, and it might overcome some of the financial problems that we encounter. It's splendid, and Nick, your talk was just first rate, even beyond your normal standard, if I may say that. It seems to me, you know, at the fundament of your talk, you were talking about things that actually happened, and there's a kind of, it seems to me, a a burgeoning refusal to look at what's there. I was listening to a podcast this afternoon on one of the UFO podcasts, and it was a rabbinical chap who completely refused to accept the possibility that anything ufological could be extraterrestrial in nature. And that proceeded from an a priori position that he had, I think, that was religious based. He was very happy to be Fortean in the extreme about Jung and about archetypes and about flying saucers, massive flying saucers in the sky actually being expressions of the Trinity and stuff like that. But he just wouldn't actually see what was there. And I think what you're saying is much the same about comparing. I think what Caroline was talking about a year or two ago at the hotel when you had the coming together. I've forgotten Caroline's second name from Edinburgh.
What? Caroline what?
Yeah. I mean, the parapsychologists are very down on data. I mean, they're very down about accepting data. They constantly say that there's very little to indicate that there's anything paranormal going on. There's very an intense disinclination to accept any kind of paranormality. But I haven't read Dean Radden's book, and I'm keen to read it. Yeah. For what it's worth, I mean, on the same tack, I wrote a letter to the Fortean Times a week or so ago. It missed this issue, but it's going in the next one. It's about flying sorcery, if people know that column that's been going for many years. And again, you know, he has admitted in his columns that he doesn't want to accept the reality. It's all coming from the inside, which was the same thing that the rabbinical professor was talking about. Well, you know, I think if thousands of people perceive an event, it's very difficult to claim that you can have a mass hallucination of the kind of dimensions of the Phoenix lights or something like that. So yes, I mean, my only question is how do I get on the merry-go-round? I'd like to experience it directly, and there must be a place I can go to have that experience.
Well, I've been talking with Steve Mira and my friend Barry, and one or two mediums. Why don't we have set up a team and go to the most active places? Go to the most active locations on the planet, and spend some time there. So it was my intention to contact the owner of Skinwalker Ranch and say, I've watched a TV documentary. It was pretty rubbish. Can we come and do a better job? And hopefully he would say yes. But if he didn't, Steve Mira said there are other places, such as Ireland, much closer, in which you may well experience what he did. Voices coming from within granite walls that could be heard and recorded, but not understood because they were speaking in an unrecognizable language. I mean, Peter, you and I have had many a long discussion, but I know people and paranormal events happen round about them. And I know places in Scotland where if you put in the time, it will not be a waste of time. But I don't know many places where you can turn up and say, it suits me now to have an experience and the universe will provide it that quickly. I think there needs, in my case, it was 10 years, but there needs to be a sustained commitment before you can expect the kind of experiences that I have.
And is that true of being in Circle as well? Because that would be the other locus that you would expect. You would very much expect paranormality to happen in.
Yes, but you need to let the group members who have to have some sort of talent or ability as mediums, you have to let them bond. And that can take longer in some cases than others. And most groups that I've joined have broken up. And before you accuse me of being a jinx, I would say it's in the nature of groups not to last long term. I saw Malcolm Robinson's hand going up there, and he knocked a couple of cars off the bridge. So.
Can I just ask that Joel's had his hand up for a while? Can Joel ask a quick question? Yeah.
Okay, Joel first.
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for your talk. My apologies that I will be asking my question then taking my video off because I have to put this creature to bed that's wandering around in the background.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he's now deciding to speak in the background. So my question is very engaging, and entirely appreciate the value and import of what you have experienced and studied, and the manner in which you've studied it, even though others may look at studying it in different ways. And I appreciate your comments there about how parapsychologists may approach it. But I'm left a little with the sense of, if the supernatural is real and this is it, then so what? Is there this major significance? Millions pray, millions go to faith healers, there are a few miraculous healings, but yet we have medical science that has a better hit rate. Millions seek solace, seek learning, many places do, and yet a few people may get some small hints or comfort or succor from the comment through mediumship. It's feeling like relatively thin gruel if this is it. And maybe the question is, so what? That's why it's not being studied further. To this, I exclude ufology. If there is other life forms out there, then that's obviously of major significance. But I'm kind of taken by one of the previous questioners who's talking about looking at quantum physics, and maybe the missing links are found there. That feels like areas of study that's going to open something up. Finding that the intelligence survives, or there is some way to miraculously heal a tiny percentage of people, so what? Thank you and good night.
I like the so what. But you don't have time for an answer because the children come.
No, I have time for an answer. I don't have time to watch the answer. I'm just listening to you on my headphones, if that's okay. So I don't mean any rudeness, but the boy is going to get his bottle and go to bed now.
As an ex-teacher, I can't be found to be resenting children. They should be fully accommodated. Yeah. What I would say very briefly, Joel, is I would dispute your sense of figures. You know, medical science cures all these people, and alternative health modalities don't, or spirit doesn't. And what I would say is it's a lot more complicated than that, because, as I've already argued, to experience paranormality, for example, through mediumship, it does involve a formula of relationship building, positive emotions, stopping a hostile or critical mindset, and then having a strong need to have that communication, rather than, oh, it's Monday, so it has to be the parapsychology lab. What are we going to do today with counters? You know that. So I would say that I know spiritualist mediums who say that spirit are around us 24/7. It's our inability and sometimes unwillingness to reach out to them that means that we are creating barriers that they find it difficult to come over. If we remove the barriers, I think you would find spirit activity around a lot more, and therefore more effective. I'm going to say something now where people might kind of really wonder. I was told to go to Sao Paulo in Brazil to learn about spiritual healing. I was told in the middle of the night, twice a year apart, to go to Sao Paulo, stop making excuses. So I went into Sao Paulo, a city 3 times the size of London, with no maps, no names, no addresses. And I walked out of my hotel and walked for 40 minutes without any idea of where I was going. And my physics professor friend Barry, who was with me, thought I was mad. He was full of guidebooks and train timetables and all sorts of possible places, but for tourists. But the first building I stopped at was a 12-story office block. And what caught my eye was the word esprit on the wall. I figured it made trainers or sportswear or something. But as soon as I walked through the door, I realized that I'd walked into a spiritual healing center, a sanctuary. There was a bust of Allan Kardec, the founder of Spiritism. And as I spoke to the reception staff, and said, Spirit told me to come here, so I'm here. They said, that's interesting, because 2 weeks ago, Spirit said to us, someone's coming to visit you from Scotland. Now, that kind of synchronicity is known to happen to people who practice extending their sensitivities and their link with Spirit. So I think it's really about who you speak to. But the point I was going to make was, every single time I've done spiritual healing, there's been an improvement. Now, I know that's a big claim to make, so let me just be careful in how I say it. That doesn't mean to say that people that are on their deathbed are going to have a miracle. What they will have is either an improvement in their condition, like my aunt, where I was told to stop visiting on palliative care because she was due to die within 2 or 3, 4 days, and 3 weeks later she was ordering pie and chips after I'd visited. They told me to stop. There's an upliftment. One friend had a father who died, but she said 2 days before he died, and I had sent him some healing through meditation. She said he sat up and had lucid conversations for the first time for months. 48 hours later, he passed. I don't claim to be a healer because there's too many people out there with big budgets and lawyers who would sue me under the Trade Description Act. And I have a healer friend who is hampered in his work by that very risk. But I can only speak as I find. And what I find is that when you try healing and set a powerful intention, there are almost always benefits. I've only come across one case where there didn't seem to be a clear benefit, and it was a friend who leads such a stressful life before, during, and after healing that she's undone the goodness of the work. But that doesn't compare to the dozens that are quietly smiling because they've had some kind of benefit. Look at people who've consulted mediums. And there's one man there, Peter Braun, that would have maybe something to say about that. They can have very interesting, stimulating conversations about things the medium couldn't really have known through the normal senses, and their lives are affected, but they don't want to broadcast it. So I'm half agreeing with you, Joel, but I think there's a lot more to be said.
Is that you, Joel? Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone else have a?
Yeah, me.
Well, there was Malcolm's next, and then Hector afterwards. Okay.
Okay. Malcolm.
Hi, Nick. Fantastic talk. Really good. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Very deep and fantastic. The way you presented it and the slides were great as well. And my question to your good self tonight on the so what, the paranormal so what, is it's all about, to a degree, getting that evidence, get that substantial evidence to provide, not just to ourselves, but also to Joe public, that there is this other life, there is this other dimension out there that we really need to have a look at, because why study it for hundreds of years not to do anything with it? So there must be an end game for this. So what I suggest, and it's just a thought, maybe we should, if Scotland or England, we should try and replicate the school experiment where we sit with professional people to get that desired result. But the difference would be to try and incorporate, I know it's, you may not like this, but incorporate some people from the media, who high standard people from the media, they can't get out of it then. They're locked in this room where they will see it from themselves. They must sign a disclosure that they must report what they saw honestly. And that possibly could maybe go out to the public domain. Look, we thought it was all shenanigans. We've got these people from the media, they've saw it themselves, but would that be the be all and end all? Would that finally pull the veil from this hidden world? Or would it not? Probably would still be in the same ballpark. So is it possible to go forward, maybe another kind of school experiment perhaps?
I would love to take up that particular challenge, and I would like Robin Foy and other people, such as the mediums he was working with at the time, Alan and Diana Bennett. I would like people to put together the conditions that we know will help the phenomena. But I I shook my head slightly, because I think you have to realise that there are forces around who would not want either that to be successful or to recognise and promote its findings. Brian Appleyard, one of the most prominent UK journalists, attended a school sitting and has admitted in writing he saw things he couldn't explain. Next was his attitude. What's next week's article? Let's move on. I can't explain it. So, and it was dropped, really. A mediumistic friend of mine who was conducting successful seances was approached by 2 members of military intelligence in the UK and told to stop, unless of course he would join their project, because they said they were ahead of him in studying the use of portals. I can't say that that definitely happened, but I'm open to the possibility that what I was told could be true. And you can think of the disinformation forces that are out there. I think there's little doubt that paranormal phenomena suggest that there are things in the fringe of human experience. There are human abilities, even if it's just some talented individuals, that have been consciously ignored.
Yeah.
Deliberately.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
so
it's Hector, and I think maybe it's Arlo.
Yep.
Nick, thank you again for that wonderful talk. What interests me is one of the aspects you mentioned was precognition. As you know, I have a particular interest in Scottish phenomenon, the second sight. Now, what I would like to ask is, what is your opinion of what precognition tells us of the nature of time?
You getting me wrapped up in the old predeterminism of Scottish clerics. Well, here's what I've been told, okay? From our world, spirit communicators have said, we don't see past, present, and future as being so very different. In other words, we say in our everyday consciousness, you can't change the past. You don't know if you've got a future, so do something in the present. That's the wise psychology of people nowadays. But spirit communicators say, oh no, we can change the past, and we can tap into the energies of the future and pull that into your present in order to help you. And when you say, what are you talking about? They say, when we look at you in your timeline, we see past, present, and future as being one bigger picture. And there is flexibility in amongst that. But I know that's only a partial image, as it were, to respond to you. Some scientists would say every decision that you make of consequence, of significance, creates a new dimension, a new pathway. There could be lots of Hectors out there living elsewhere in much less ambitious projects, or greater ones.
Okay, yes. Thanks. Thank you.
And Arlo, you were wanting another question, yeah? Hold on. You're muted. Hold on. I've tried to unmute you. Yeah,
I'm unmuted.
I can hear you now.
Okay, right. So just a couple of quick points to return to your thing about the abilities of medicine to cure things. I think that the increase in life expectancy since medicine and practice-based medicine has developed over the last half century, century, that stands itself in its own ground. And you know, there have been spiritual practices around for many years, and we've seen a sudden increase in life expectancy as a result of the advancements of what we would call traditional medicine. So please don't underplay the advancements of scientific rigor being applied to medical practice. You know, that's what I would say.
I agree, Arlo. If you also agree not to slap down everything that would represent an alternative with one blanket no.
No, Nick, you understand me, and I've told you stories recently as well about experiences I've had which cannot be explained in the normal way. Now, I don't really want to go into them in detail tonight for various reasons, but I have experienced certain events recently where modern science, as it stands at the moment, could not explain certain things certain events that have happened to me experientially. Okay, so I'm not a skeptic in the sort of I will put down any evidence that anyone gives, because I've had evidence of my own, several bits of evidence. So no, I don't say there's no paranormal experiences. I don't say I've had them. So, you know, what I would say though is, and thank you to Joe, who I know he's got to put the bear to bed. I think he's right. I think that I appreciate that he's taken up the point I made. I think that there is this little hole in current science, and I think that this is where, and it's a shame Brian, the physicist, has gone offline. I think this is where we could, as a society, not that I'm part of it yet, but I would very much like to be part of any research projects that are ongoing. And I think I could bring a scientific rigor to that. And I think that there are things that we could do in order to prove things which cannot be explained by current science. And I think that is a very important thing that we should research.
Yeah,
I don't know if you agree.
I'm in agreement with you, Arlo. But just to flag up something tangentially related, okay? I can think of lots of projects which would be stunning if they were put in the public domain that are classified.
Yeah.
What's that about? It's about hiding from the public the very thing you're trying to produce and show.
Yeah.
And lots of different people can talk about it. Skinwalker Ranch, UFOs,
yeah.
and projects internationally that they've been stopped, they've been closed down. It was Peter Braun that brought some of these to my attention in the past, and we're waiting for a disclosure project, but previous disclosures have been not just ignored, flatly ignored, but actually they've been interfered with so that they cannot get media attention. Would that be right, Peter?
You have to unmute yourself. Yeah, it's you.
Again, Peter, try unmute yourself again.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, there's an outstanding example of that recently with the whole ATIP program, which where do I start with it? Has everyone heard of the ATIP program? And
no.
Related to you mentioned Skinwalker Ranch. The American government were for years, for a very long time, secretly, covertly funding from black monies projects which went from actually involved Skinwalker Ranch specifically, because they saw it as a crucible of experimentation. They saw it as a place where stuff was going on, and it had to be looked at. They did it in conjunction with the American billionaire whose name I'm going to forget for a second.
Elon Musk.
Bigelow?
No.
Robert Bigelow.
Bigelow, sorry, I'm having a senior moment with Bigelow. That led on to what became ATIP, which was the Advanced Aero Threat Identification Program. And out of ATIP came the recent revelations, essentially, about the Tic Tac videos that I'm sure you all must have seen. The Tic Tac videos in 2007.
No.
In the US.
No, I've not seen them.
The very, very small UFOs tracked and followed by fighter pilots.
It made the international news because eventually the Pentagon admitted 2 weeks ago that these were real and they couldn't explain what it was about. If you look up, you go online, it's very easy to find. But the point about this is that the ATIP program, which was secretly going on in the Pentagon, looking at all this weird stuff involving ghosts and UFOs and all sorts of things, was actually stopped because by the admission of the guy who used to run it, Luis Elizondo, there were elements within the American government who had within the Pentagon who had a say in the running of these programs, that it had to be closed closed down because they believed that the phenomena that they were discovering were demonic in nature. Now, you can't have a more high level, and I'm not making this up. I mean, this is a matter of record and a matter of fact. It does show you that that's straying into ideology and religious belief, which should have no actual place, I think, in looking at this stuff. We should be as scientific as possible in looking at it. And it's interesting that something that was essentially scientific in nature and totally funded by the American government was stopped by some fundamentalist nutters from the southern United States.
Typical.
Is there anybody who wants to ask a question? We've got roughly 10 people that we can't see, but if they can hear me, if you just call out your name, we can unmute you. Oh, of course, you can't call out a name if they're muted. So let's unmute them.
I'll unmute them.
And is there anybody who wants to ask a question? Maybe somebody that hasn't already. We'll open it out a little bit. No?
Is there anybody there?
Ah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
A friend of mine retorted recently, your psychics aren't up to much. They didn't foretell the worldwide COVID-19 phenomenon. Within 10 minutes, I pointed out that not only had no less a person than Bill Gates stood up and predicted it, but a famous American psychic, the late Sylvia Brown, wrote a book saying there would be a massive worldwide respiratory disease. She named the year, and she said it would seem to come out of nowhere with a very quick transmission. And she also said, by the way, it would go away just as quickly, but of course we're not at that point yet.
The thing is, Rick,
sorry?
The thing around that is there's a million people predicting a million things.
Yeah.
The chances of one of them not predicting this is pretty slim.
I'll predict something just now. There'll be an airplane crash within the next month.
Exactly. Whatever happens, somebody will have predicted it.
Yeah.
And if that's those scams about how people get drawn into like betting syndicates, because they will send it to a million people and they will say this horse is going to win this race, and then they'll not send it to the ones who didn't, the horse they predicted didn't win that race, but then they'll send them another one for the next race, and then so they send it to 100,000 people the first time. 10 of those, 10%, 90% of those have to drop out the second time. The second time they send it to 10,000 people, and 10% of those have to drop out the second time. So they send it to 1,000 people, and then 10% of those have to drop out. And then the syndicate keeps going on until you've got one person where this betting syndicate has got the answer, and they have predicted 10 races in a row. And at that point, somebody goes, flipping heck, these are amazing. They predicted 10 races in a row. And they must be right. That's how this works. There are syndicates that thrive on this shite.
Yeah. So on that lovely note, does anyone else have a question for Nick? If no one else has a question, then I'm going to finish off just with one question before I round this up. So my question to you, Nick, is the sociologist of the sort of paranormal, James McLennan, noted that across all world cultures, paranormal phenomena, whether it's people experiencing odd things or poltergeist phenomena, they all seem to be a prelude to becoming healers. So in regards to your own experience, do you feel that in some sense all your experiences have been leading you towards healing?
No, not in the sense of a funneling and a narrowing, because I feel my consciousness has expanded even wider. I'm looking at new aspects of things that I might be able to do or experience. But I can tell you what I thought was interesting. I thought it was interesting that I was woken up in the middle of the night by a male voice in my ear, and I don't sleep with a man. And the voice said, resign from your job and go to Sao Paulo. And I didn't know at the time, I'll be honest, I didn't know whether Sao Paulo was a town, a city, a region, a country, or what. And I did try to resign. They wouldn't let me go. And a year later, I had the same voice in my ear. It's the person, whoever it was, they didn't identify themselves, saying, I thought you were going to resign. And I said, well, I tried to. And they said, but you could do it now. So I went back in and I had prepared a letter of resignation. And I said to my boss, I'd like to retire. And he said, no, can't even guarantee if you wait another year, it'll happen. And I said, well, there's my letter of resignation. And I used my retirement money to fly out to Sao Paulo. Also, I stopped off for an ayahuasca ceremony with a shaman in Machu Picchu, and I did a nice holiday in Rio. I can recommend it. I got photobombed by Jesus when I had my photo taken. It's on my profile. But to come back to the point issue, when I arrived in Sao Paulo at night and then went down for breakfast the next morning, I literally knew nothing about the place. And it was my friend who said to me, Sao Paulo's 3 times the size of London. What do you mean you're going for a walk? Where? And I found the centre. I was welcomed with open arms. They gave me an English interpreter, a lovely lassie, and I was allowed to see their diagnosis of 5,000 patients a week, each attended to by 500 trained healers. Each healer had done healing training for 5 years, and they had queues outside the building. My friend Barry said, well, what do you expect? There's no welfare system over there. The spiritualist healing is free. Otherwise, they pay a fortune to go to the local hospital. So you'd expect big numbers. But what I didn't expect was being shown into when healing was actually happening. And there were 3 healers per patient. And the healer was speaking into the patient's ear on one side, and there was someone behind and someone to the side. And I was asked to comment. So I put forward my awareness, my sensitivity, and I realized that the healer on the right-hand side was not functioning. There was something wrong with her energy. It seemed to me she was sick, and she was meant to be one of the healers. So I said that, and they said, you're correct. We put her in there as a test. Take her place. So I took her place, and I felt the healing energies. Okay. When I asked Spirit before going there, why do I have to go to the other side of the world? They said very simply, because there are things that you can learn there that are more difficult to teach you in Scotland. So I came back. I also went to a restaurant, and Spirit said to me, go and talk to the woman who's just sat down outside. And I looked, and I got up from the dinner table. My friend Barry said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to talk to that woman outside. And he had a look, and he went, yeah, nice looking Oriental girl. Yeah, okay. I went outside, sat down beside her and said to her, is it all right if I sit here? And she said in a cultivated English accent, yes. And I said, oh, a lovely accent. Where did you learn that? She said, Cambridge. And I said, what do you do that takes you to Cambridge? She said, I'm an actress. She said, I'm currently a singer, and that's what I do to pay my bills here. She said, but I'm an actress looking for work in either the UK or in America, and I figured it would help to have an English accent. And she said, but what are you doing here? Because this is not an area for tourists. And I said, well, I'm here to kind of learn about spiritual healing, I think. And she said, well, I can tell you everything you need to know. She said, because I'm both a medium and a healer. And she demonstrated in 20 odd minutes that she knew about the UK scene, and she knew a hell of a lot about the Sao Paulo scene. Now, I would suggest to you, what are the chances? She was the only person I spoke to when I was led to do that. What are the chances? It has to be that there is some level of influence, either with her or me or both. But these circumstances, although they're remarkable, they're not solitary. They're not unique. And I would suspect that lots of people can tell about remarkable coincidences. Can I just tease out one more story? It'll take me seconds. In a time of crisis, I thought someone was dying at the other end of the line. I lived near Glasgow in a little place called Johnston in Renfrewshire, and the person I was phoning lived in Irvine in Ayrshire. concerned that they might literally be dying, either because they had an attack or they're drug induced or whatever, I phoned the operator. And the operator listened to my story of, I phoned this woman, I think she might be dying. He said, what do you want me to do about it? I said, I want you to share the decision to see if it's worth calling either the ambulance or the police. I said, because I'm really not sure what I'm dealing with, but it sounds serious. He said, okay, give me the name, address, and telephone number. And I didn't even manage to give him that before his tone changed. And he said, what is this, some kind of sick joke? That's my mother-in-law.
Good.
What are the chances at a time of crisis that when I seek a second opinion and there's 40 telephone operators in the exchange, I get the one who's the son-in-law of the woman I'm concerned about, and she'd taken a stroke? What are the chances? These things happen a lot to people who are attuned. I'm looking here at the top of my screen at Mishka. She can tell you about synchronicity and coincidences, and she'll have her own interpretation of them. And I can see from one or two smiles that you recognize that there is something to this. But I don't want to go on in this. Yeah, you've been very generous in giving me time. Is there anything else that you want?
Well, we're actually, I'm afraid we're coming right up to the end of time now. And I know you could go on, and there was a great little anecdote to end on. So thank you so much for your presentation, your talk, Nick. It was absolutely fascinating. Yeah, there certainly is more to life than we can measure, but here's our efforts to and our gratitude to you tonight. And just before we give you a big round of applause, also, I'd like to thank you and council, especially Penny, for doing all the technical tests and trials to make sure that this worked. So thank you to my fellow councillors, and thank you all for tuning in. But the biggest round of applause goes to us. Thank you, Nick.
Well done,
Nick.
Nick.
Here, Nick. Much appreciated.
Thank you.